The sun sat high over the wide, endless plains, a merciless torch hanging in a cloudless sky. The earth below was cracked and pale, thirsty for rain that had not come in weeks. Grass that once swayed green in the wind now stood brittle and yellow, crunching beneath the smallest steps. Coyotes prowled in the distance, their howls carrying like sad laments across the wasteland. This was no place for a child, let alone 3 of them. But there they were, 3 tiny figures stumbling across the open stretch of land, triplets, barely 10 years of age, thin as reeds, each step heavy with exhaustion. They were barefoot, their small feet coated in dust, and their clothes were little more than torn scraps sewn together in haste. Their faces told the story of hunger and hardship, hollow cheeks, cracked lips, and wide, pleading eyes that seemed too heavy for such young bodies. Their names were Taya, Nikon, and Sani, siblings born into the same hour, once celebrated as a blessing among their people. Their tribe had always believed the triplets carried a rare spiritual bond, 3 threads woven from the same cloth. But what use were blessings in a world stripped bare by drought and strife? Their people had scattered, driven from their hunting grounds by rival settlers, their shelters burned by raids, their elders too weak to flee. The triplets had watched as their family faded into shadows, some taken, some lost, some left behind. And so, they walked. The land was cruel, but children often carry more hope than grown men. Taya, the eldest by minutes, walked in front, her chin lifted as though she could see salvation beyond the horizon. Nikon followed close, often stumbling but never letting go of his siblings' hands. And Sani, the quietest of the 3, whispered soft prayers as he walked, asking the Great Spirit to guide them, to show them where help could be found. The day dragged on. Heat pressed down like an iron weight. The triplets' shadows stretched, long and thin on the ground. Their bellies ached with emptiness, and their throats burned from thirst. At times, Nikon would sway, his small legs trembling as though they might give out. But Taya would steady him, whispering, "Just a little farther. Someone will help us." It was faith that carried them, not strength. By late afternoon, they reached a rise in the land. Beyond it, the plains gave way to signs of life. Fences of split-rail wood, distant barns, and the faint glimmer of water troughs catching the sun. To them it was like seeing a miracle. Their weary eyes fixed on the sprawling estate in the distance, a ranch unlike any they had ever imagined. Herds of cattle grazed in patches of withered grass. Horses stamped their hooves in corral fences, and a massive house with wide porches sat like a fortress against the empty land. The triplets stopped at the hill's crest, staring down at it, with both awe and fear. They had heard whispers about the man who owned that ranch. A giant, they said, not only in size, but in power. He was rich beyond imagining, his herds stretching across valleys, his word carrying weight in every town meeting. Some said he had no heart, only stone where compassion should be. Others claimed he dealt in fairness, but never in mercy. Children, like the triplets, had no place in a man's world built on money, cattle, and pride. Still, what choice did they have? Taya looked at her brothers, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. "We can't turn back," she said firmly. "This is where—" "We ask," the boys nodded, fearful, yet too desperate to refuse. So the 3 of them descended the hill, their tiny bodies framed by the vastness of the ranch. Each step was heavy, but determination carried them forward. They followed the winding dirt road until they reached the grand wooden gate that guarded the estate. The ranch's insignia was branded into the beams, a bold symbol of strength and ownership. For a moment, they hesitated. The gate seemed larger than anything they had ever stood before. The house loomed in the distance, its windows gleaming, like watchful eyes. They felt as though they were trespassing into another world, one where they did not belong. But hunger silenced doubt. With trembling hands, Neekin reached up and struck the iron latch against the gate. The clang echoed through the ranch yard, a sound far louder than he expected. Horses stirred in their pens. Dogs barked. And from the porch, a tall shadow shifted. A figure rising, turning toward the noise. The triplets pressed close together, 3 against the world. The harsh plains had led them here, to this moment, to the rancher whose name they had only heard in fearful whispers. Whether salvation or rejection awaited, they could not yet know. But their small voices, carried by desperation, were about to pierce a world much larger than their own. The clang of the gate carried across the ranch yard like a warning bell. Dust stirred under the hooves of restless horses, dogs barked with sharp ferocity, and men working near the corrals turned their heads toward the sound. But it was not the ranch hands who drew the triplets' eyes. It was the figure that emerged from the porch. He was massive, the kind of man who seemed to bend the world around him simply by standing in it. Broad shoulders filled the doorway, a chest like a barrel stretched the fabric of his worn but clean shirt, and the sun caught the silver strands in his thick black beard. His hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but even from a distance, the children felt the weight of his gaze. This was Silas McGraw, the giant rancher. The name carried through saloons and trading posts like a half-legend, half-warning. He was the man whose herds numbered in the thousands, whose barns were filled when others were empty, and whose land stretched farther than the eye could see. In the frontier towns, some called him the King of the Plains. Others whispered darker tales, how he drove men off land he wanted, how his voice could silence entire council meetings, how mercy was a word he never learned. He descended, the porch steps slowly, each boot striking the wood with deliberate weight. His long stride carried him toward the gate where the triplets stood trembling. The closer he came, the larger he seemed, not just in size, but in presence. The children clung tighter to each other, their small forms swallowed by the shadow of the man. Behind him, ranch hands followed at a distance. They were rough men, dusty from work, their expressions sharp with curiosity and suspicion. One of them muttered, "Strays again. Best to send 'em on their way." Another spat into the dirt and added, "Nothing but trouble, boss. You know how it goes." But Silas said nothing. He stopped before the gate, towering over the triplets. "What do you want?" His voice was deep, like rolling thunder. It was not cruel, but it carried no warmth either. For a moment, the children could not speak. The weight of his stare pressed against them, and the silence stretched, broken only by the restless shuffle of cattle nearby. Finally, Taya, the eldest by mere minutes, found her voice. "Please, sir," she whispered, her throat dry. "We have no food, no water. We need help." Her brothers nodded, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling but unwilling to back away. Silas studied them with unreadable eyes. He took in their thin frames, the dirt caked on their small hands, the weariness in their faces. He had seen strays before. Children, widows, wanderers, all looking for a handout. Most he had turned away. A ranch of his size did not grow on kindness. It grew on discipline, hard choices, and a refusal to be weakened by sentiment. "Where are your people?" he asked. "Gone," Sonny murmured, his voice so soft the rancher had to lean down to catch it. "We are alone." The ranch hands behind him shifted uncomfortably. One laughed under his breath, another shook his head. "Boss, best send 'em off before we've got the whole town on our backs. Folks don't take kindly to us feeding every mouth that shows up." But Silas did not answer them. Instead, he straightened to his full height, arms crossing over his chest as he stared at the 3 tiny faces. He thought of his land, his herds, his men, all of it built on a foundation of strength and order, and yet, as he looked at the children, something long buried stirred inside him, a memory of his own. Boyhood, barefoot and hungry, standing before men who had more than enough yet turned him away. His father's harsh voice had branded itself into him. A man bends to no one, especially not to the weak. That lesson had shaped him. It had made him strong. It had made him feared. But it had also left a coldness in him, one he never dared question until this moment. The triplets' eyes did not waver, though they brimmed with fear. They did not run. They did not beg for mercy beyond their simple words. They stood together, 3 against the world, and something about their courage unsettled the giant rancher. He exhaled slowly, the air heavy with tension. The ranch yard seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Finally, he spoke. "You've got guts standing here," he said, his tone softer than before. "But guts don't feed bellies." His words hung in the air, sharp and final. The children lowered their heads, the weight of despair settling on their small shoulders. The ranch hands smirked knowingly, certain their boss would turn away just as he always had. But then, Silas did something none of them expected. He crouched down on one knee, lowering his massive frame until his eyes were level with the children. His voice, though still deep, carried something new, a note of quiet, recognition. "You're not the first to stand at my gate hungry," he said slowly. "And maybe you won't be the last." The giant rancher's silence hung heavy in the air. His crouched figure seemed like a mountain lowering itself before 3 trembling children. Yet the weight of his gaze was no less intimidating. Around them the yard was restless. The shuffle of cattle, the sharp barks of the dogs, the murmurs of ranch hands who had seen many strange sights on these plains, but never this. Taya swallowed hard. She had spoken once already, but the words had nearly choked her. This was different. This was the moment that could mean life or death for her and her brothers. She took a shaky breath, forcing her small voice to steady. "Please, sir," she began again, stronger this time. "We have walked many miles. We have nothing left. If you send us away, we will not survive." Silas McGraw's eyes narrowed, but he did not interrupt. He simply watched, his face unreadable like stone carved from the mountains. Nikon, standing beside his sister, lifted his chin though his voice trembled. "We don't ask for much. Just food, water, maybe a place to sleep." His little hands clutched the wooden gate as though holding on to the last hope he had. The ranch hands snorted. One of them, a lean man with a sun-scorched face, muttered loud enough for all to hear. "Plenty of mouths of our own to feed. Can't go taking in strays every time one wanders by." "Yeah," another added, spitting into the dust. "Best to send 'em packing before they get too comfortable." The children heard the words, felt the sting of them, but did not back down. Instead, it was the quietest of the 3, Sanny, who stepped forward. His small frame trembled, but his dark eyes locked on the ranchers with a courage that startled even his siblings. "You have more than you need," Sanny said softly but firmly. "We saw your cattle. We saw your water. The earth has been cruel to us, but not to you. If you turn us away, it is not because you cannot help, it is because you will not." The words struck like a hammer blow. The ranch hands exchanged looks of shock, some scoffing, others muttering curses. A child, one barely able to stand, had spoken to Silas McGraw with the bluntness no grown man dared. For a long, tense moment, the rancher said nothing, his eyes fixed on the boy, studying him as though measuring the weight of his soul. His silence was more unnerving than anger would have been. Finally, Silas spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "You've got a sharpie tongue for someone so small. Do you know what happens to those who speak to me that way?" The triplets stiffened. Nikon instinctively pulled his brother back, his heart pounding. Taya's hands clenched at her sides. But Sani, though pale, did not look away. "They stop being afraid," he whispered. The yard went utterly still. Even the dogs seemed to sense something sacred in the moment. Silas's jaw tightened. For the briefest instant, his stern expression cracked, not with anger, but with something else, something almost forgotten. Respect? Memory? A faint echo of the boy he once had been? Behind him, the ranch hands grew restless. One called out, "Boss, don't waste time on this nonsense. They're just beggars. Send 'em off." Another added, "If word spreads you're feeding outsiders, every lost soul in the county will come knocking." The pressure was real. Silas had built his empire on discipline and reputation. Compassion was seen as weakness, and weakness had no place on the plains. Yet, as he looked at the three small faces, defiant, desperate, and bound together by unshakable love, something in him stirred that no drought, no battle, no wealth had ever moved. Taya, her courage swelling after her brother's bold words, stepped closer to the rancher. She tilted her face upward, her voice breaking but resolute. "You can turn us away," she said, "and no one would stop you. But if you do, our bones will rest on your land. The earth will remember." The plea was no longer a beggar's whisper. It was a challenge, a declaration, a reminder that even the smallest lives carried weight. Silas rose slowly from his crouch, towering once again like a shadow over the triplets. His massive frame loomed, but his eyes were no longer stone. He turned his gaze to the ranch hands, who waited eagerly for him to send the children away. Instead, he uttered words that left them stunned. "Bring food," he ordered. "And water, now." The yard erupted with disbelief. "What?" one ranch hand blurted. "Boss, you can't—" "Now," Silas repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. The men froze, silenced by the authority in his voice. Some grumbled, but none dared defy him. Slowly, they dispersed, heading toward the cookhouse. The triplets stood rooted in shock. Taya's lips parted, Nikan's eyes widened, and even Sani's defiant posture faltered. For the first time since their long walk across the plains, hope flickered within them like a fragile flame. Silas looked back at them, his face stern but softened by something deeper. "You'll eat, you'll drink, then we'll talk." The unexpected plea had not only saved their lives, it had cracked open the heart of a man the world believed unbreakable. The smell of stew drifted from the cookhouse, carried on the evening wind. The triplets sat at a long wooden table under the watchful eyes of the ranch hands. Before them were bowls of food, bread, beans, and steaming broth. Their tiny hands trembled as they lifted spoons, eating cautiously at first, then hungrily, as if afraid the meal would vanish if they didn't finish fast enough. Silas McGraw stood nearby, arms crossed, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the yard. He said nothing, simply watching. His decision had already unsettled the ranch, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down like a storm building on the horizon. The men whispered among themselves. Some leaned against fence posts, their faces twisted in disapproval. Others kept their voices low, but their eyes sharp with judgment. The murmurs grew louder as the cook refilled the triplets' bowls. Finally, one man spoke up, Jeb Carter, the foreman. His grizzled beard and weather-worn face marked him as one of Silas's most trusted men, a ranch hand who had ridden with him for years. Jeb cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Boss," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You sure about this? Feeding a few hungry kids is one thing, but keeping them here? That's asking for trouble." The triplets froze, their spoons suspended in midair. Their eyes darted from Jeb to Silas, fear gnawing at their brief taste of comfort. Silas's gaze shifted slowly to his foreman. "And what trouble would that be?" Jeb didn't flinch. "You know the way folks out here think. They don't take kindly to outsiders, especially native ones. Word gets out you're sheltering them, there'll be whispers, then complaints, then worse. You'll have the other ranchers on your back before the week's out." A murmur of agreement rippled through the men. "Jeb's right," another ranch hand added. "We got enough mouths to feed without strays. Times are hard. Ain't our responsibility to fix the world." "Ain't safe neither," someone else muttered. "Bringing trouble to our gates." The triplets' faces burned with shame, though they had done nothing wrong. Taya lowered her spoon, tears welling in her eyes. Nikon's small hands balled into fists. Sani, though silent, stared at the table as if the wood itself could swallow him whole. Silas's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but not so soon, not so openly. He straightened to his full height, his voice carrying like thunder across the yard. "These children asked for help. I gave it." "That ain't the point, boss," Jeb pressed, though respectfully. "The men are worried. We all work hard to keep this ranch running, and you know how fragile peace is out here. The settlers in town, the other landowners, they see you siding with natives, they'll take it as betrayal. You'll lose support. Maybe worse." The ranch. Hands nodded, emboldened by their foreman. Some muttered about lost business, others about the danger of attacks or reprisals. The air grew tense. The ranch divided in spirit, though united in labor. Silas listened, his face carved from stone. He understood their fear. It was the kind that ruled the plains, a fear born of scarcity, prejudice, and survival. But as he looked, back at the triplets, their fragile bodies hunched in silence, something within him refused to bend. "They are children," Silas said finally, his voice low but sharp. "Not raiders, not thieves, children. And as long as they are under my roof, they will eat, they will drink, and they will be safe." The firmness of his words cut through the murmurs, silencing some, angering others. Jeb's brow furrowed, but he said nothing more. The men exchanged glances, uncertain, restless, divided. For the triplets, the words struck like a lifeline. Taya blinked back tears of relief. Nikon's fists loosened, though he still trembled. Sani dared to look up, his dark eyes fixed on the rancher with something like newfound faith. Yet even as hope stirred in the children, the seeds of discord were planted in the ranch. The men might obey Silas, but their loyalty was strained. Some whispered in the shadows, questioning if their boss had gone soft, if compassion was weakness, if this decision would one day bring ruin to them all. Night fell heavy over the plains. Stars scattered across the sky like embers on black velvet. The ranch quieted, but the division lingered like smoke after fire. Silas stood alone on the porch, staring out at the endless land he had conquered with his own hands. He heard the distant howls of coyotes, the restless shifting of cattle, and the faint breathing of 3 children asleep inside. He knew Jeb and the men were right about one thing. Word would spread. The town would hear, the other ranchers would hear, and soon every eye in the valley would be on him. The ranch was quiet beneath the weight of night. A pale moon drifted above the plains, silvering the grass and casting long shadows across the yard. The cattle murmured softly in their pens, horses stamped in the corral, and the wind whispered through the rafters of the great house. Inside, the triplets slept in a loft above the cookhouse, their bellies finally full, their breaths slow and even. For the first time in weeks, their small bodies lay in peace. Yet only a few yards away, in the main house, Silas McGraw could find no rest. He sat alone in his study, a lantern flickering on the desk, casting warm light across ledgers, maps, and letters. Papers that usually commanded his full attention, the accounts of his cattle, the wages of his men, the contracts binding his empire, now lay forgotten beneath his restless hand. Instead, his thoughts returned again and again to the 3 children, their wide, hollow eyes, their trembling voices. The boldness of the smallest boy who had dared to say, "If you turn us away, it is not because you cannot help. It is because you will not." Silas leaned back in his chair. running a hand through his thick beard. He had spent years building himself into a man no one could challenge. His land, his herd, his reputation, all forged by strength and a refusal to show weakness. Yet those children had stood at his gate, unafraid to demand what even grown men hesitated to ask of him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the lantern light. He raised it halfway to his lips, then stopped, staring at the way it trembled slightly in his hand. His father's voice echoed from the past, sharp and unforgiving. "A man bends to no one. Mercy is for fools. You give once, you'll give forever, and then you'll have nothing." That lesson had carried Silas through a lifetime of battles, against drought, against rivals, against weakness itself. And yet, sitting there with the memory of those children seared into his mind, he felt the old words falter. He lowered the glass without drinking. The room was heavy with silence, but his heart was loud, beating with questions he had never dared ask. What was strength truly? Was it the ability to build an empire with iron will? Or was it the courage to show compassion when the world demanded cruelty? He rose from his chair and walked to the window. Outside, the moonlit plains stretched endlessly, a kingdom he had, conquered with blood and sweat. But for the first time, he wondered what all his wealth and power meant if he could not spare a crust of bread for 3 children. His thoughts drifted farther back, to his own boyhood. A boy not unlike Nikon, clinging to scraps of hope when hunger gnawed at his belly. He remembered standing outside a general store with his mother, begging for flour when their home was empty. He remembered the shopkeeper's sneer, the way the man tossed them aside like stray dogs. That day, Silas swore never to beg again, never to rely on anyone, never to show weakness. He had kept that vow his whole life, but now, seeing the triplets standing at his gate, he realized they were not weak at all. They were strong, stronger than most men he knew, because they had the courage to ask, the courage to survive. The B. Whiskey on his desk remained untouched as he returned to his chair. He opened his ledger but found himself sketching instead, lines that soon became the shapes of 3 small figures, standing hand in hand. He stared at the drawing, rough and clumsy, yet strikingly clear. They had left their mark on him, and no amount of stubbornness could erase it. A knock broke his thoughts. Jeb Carter, the foreman, stepped inside, hat in hand. His face was weary, but his eyes sharp. "Boss," Jeb said quietly, "the men are uneasy. They don't like this. Some say you're risking everything we built." Silas didn't look up from the paper. "Everything we built?" he echoed. "Or everything I built?" Jeb stiffened. "You know I've stood by you through worse. But these kids, they ain't our fight." Silas finally raised his eyes, and there was fire in them. "Maybe that's the problem, Jeb. Maybe we've spent so long guarding what's ours that we've forgotten what it means to stand for something that isn't." Jeb shifted uncomfortably, but said no more. He tipped his hat and left, the door closing softly behind him. Silas sat back in his chair, staring at the lantern flame until it blurred. His heart warred with itself, discipline against compassion, reputation against humanity. For the first time in years, he did not know which side would win. But as he finally rose to blow out the lamp, he knew one thing for certain. Those children had changed something in him. Whether for better or worse, only time would tell. The battle was no longer out on the plains. It was inside his own chest. The sun rose over the plains in a blaze of orange, streaking the sky with fire. The ranch stirred awake, the clang of buckets at the well, the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic hammer of hooves as horses were led from their stalls. Men moved briskly, but the air was heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Everyone had heard the whispers. The boss had taken in strays, 3 native children who'd wandered in off the plains. Some of the men called it madness, others weakness, and still others a sign that Silas McGraw was losing the iron edge that had made him untouchable. Silas himself walked the yard, his towering frame unmistakable against the morning light. He stopped at the cookhouse, where the triplets sat on the steps, clutching bowls of oatmeal. Their faces were still wary, their eyes darting at every sound, but they no longer looked hollow. For the first time, they looked alive. Taya stood when she saw him, brushing crumbs from her hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but steady. Silas nodded, though he did not speak. His gaze lingered on them, then shifted to the gathering crowd of ranch hands. The men were waiting, not for orders, but for answers. Jeb Carter, the foreman, stepped forward. His weathered face was stern, his voice edged with challenge. "Boss, we need to talk." The ranch yard quieted, all eyes turning to the two men. "You gave 'em food. You gave 'em water," Jeb said. "Fine, but what now? We can't keep 'em here. You know what'll happen if word spreads. The town'll turn on us. The other ranchers'll see it as betrayal. We can't carry this weight." Murmurs rippled through the men. Some nodded, others crossed their arms. The triplets lowered their heads, fear prickling across their small frames. Silas stood silent for a long moment, his hands resting on his belt. Then slowly, he stepped toward the children. He crouched down, one knee sinking into the dust, until he was eye level with them. The yard fell utterly still. He studied each face. Taya's quiet determination, Nikan's fragile bravery, Sani's unflinching eyes. They looked so small against the vastness of his land, yet something about them carried a weight beyond their years. "You came here asking for help," he said, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "And I gave it. But help is more than a meal." The children blinked, uncertain. Silas turned his head, his voice rising so that every ranch hand could hear. "These children will not be sent away. They will stay. Here, with us." The words struck the yard like a thunderclap. The ranch hands erupted in protest. "What? You can't be serious. This ain't a charity." One man spat angrily into the dirt. Another threw his hat down, pacing in disbelief. Even Jeb's face hardened, his jaw clenched. "Boss, you're asking for a fight we don't need," he warned. Silas rose to his full height, towering over them all. His voice cut through their protests like a blade. "I built this ranch from nothing," he thundered. "Every fence post, every herd, every barn. You've worked it, but I bled for it. And I'll be damned if I let fear or prejudice tell me who can or cannot find shelter on my land." The men froze. His authority, though challenged, was undeniable. "These children," Silas continued, pointing toward the triplets, "will not just eat at my table. They'll work beside us. They'll learn. They'll grow, and they'll earn their keep same as any man here. If that offends you, there's the gate. Don't let the dust hit you on the way out." A heavy silence followed. The ranch hands shifted uneasily, some exchanging dark glances, others staring at the ground. None dared speak against him again. The triplets stood frozen, their hearts pounding. Taya's lips parted in disbelief. Nikan clutched his sister's hand tight, and Sani's dark eyes shone with a light he had never felt before. Hope. Silas turned back to them, his voice gentler now. "You asked for help. I'm giving more than that. You have a home here for as long as you choose to stay." The children's throats tightened with emotion. They had walked across the harsh plains with nothing but desperation. Now before them stood a man who had given them not only food and water, but a future. From the porch, an old ranch hand shook his head in disbelief. "Never thought I'd live to see the day Silas McGraw took in 3 hungry strays," he muttered. "Not strays," Silas corrected, his gaze never leaving the children. "Family." The word rippled through the yard, heavy and shocking. Family. A word Silas McGraw had never spoken in years. Not since he buried his mother, not since he walked away from the boy he once was. And in that moment, the world shifted. The ranch was no longer just a kingdom built on cattle and iron. It was a place where 3 fragile children, against all odds, had found shelter, and where a hardened man had finally revealed the heart no one believed he still had. His decision had stunned them all. But more than that, it had set in motion a change that could never be undone. For 3 days, the ranch seemed to run on uneasy silence. The triplets stayed close to the barn, doing small chores that Silas assigned, carrying water, sweeping the porch, helping the cook peel potatoes. The men tolerated their presence, though, not without hard looks and muttered remarks. But word has a way of traveling faster than horses across the plains. By the 4th day, news of Silas McGraw's shocking decision had already spread to town. The barkeep whispered it across the counter. The blacksmith muttered it over the ringing of his hammer. And by dusk, a group of ranchers sat in the saloon, shaking their heads, slamming whiskey glasses, and swearing it was the beginning of ruin. Taking in 3 native children? He's lost his mind, spat one rancher, his mustache bristling with outrage. Next thing you know, he'll be giving them his land, another sneered. He's siding with them against us. We won't stand for it. The saloon filled with angry murmurs, the kind that grow into storms. Back on the ranch, Silas stood on the porch, arms folded across his chest, watching the horizon. He had known resistance would come. He had expected whispers, even anger from his men. But he also knew the town, their pride, their fear, their prejudice, and he braced himself for the weight of their fury. That night, as the moon hung low, a lantern light flickered at the gate. Jeb Carter strode up to the porch, his boots crunching. Gravel. He stopped before Silas, his jaw set. They're planning something, he warned. Town's riled up. Other ranchers, too. You've stirred a hornet's nest, boss. Silas didn't flinch. Let them come. Jeb shook his head, his voice edged with frustration. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Those kids... They're not kids to me, Silas cut him off sharply. They're family now. The foreman exhaled hard, running a hand through his gray hair. You're risking everything you've built. The cattle drives, the contracts, even the safety of this land. You're one man against a whole town's hate. Silas's eyes burned with quiet fire. I've been one man against the world before. Didn't stop me then. Won't stop me now. The foreman studied him a moment longer, then sighed. You're a stubborn old mule, McGraw. Always have been. But his voice softened. If you're set on this, then I'm with you. Just don't say I didn't warn you. The next morning, the backlash arrived. A group of townsfolk rode to the ranch, 20 strong, led by Hank Travers, the wealthiest rancher in the county, and a man whose influence stretched far. His horse pawed the dirt at the gate as Hank raised his voice so all could hear. McGraw, he bellowed, we hear you've taken in savages. You think you can bring their kind among decent folk and not face consequences? Silas stepped out, onto the porch, calm but unyielding. The triplets peeked from behind the door, their small faces pale with fear. They're children, Silas said evenly. Children in need of shelter, and they've found it here. Hank's lip curled. Children. Don't matter. Their blood ain't our blood. You're spitting in the face of every rancher who's fought to protect this land from their kind. You're betraying your own. The crowd murmured in agreement, anger swelling like a rising tide. Silas stepped down from the porch, his boots striking the dirt with deliberate weight. He stopped at the gate, looking Hank dead in the eye. I've built my ranch with these 2 hands, Silas said, his voice low but carrying across the yard. Not you, not the town, not anyone else. I owe you nothing, and I'll protect what's mine, whether it's cattle, land, or 3 children who deserve better than your hate. A hush fell. Hank's face twisted red, his pride wounded before his men. "You'll regret this," Hank spat, jerking his reins. "You can't stand against us all." With a snap of leather, his horse wheeled around, and the mob followed him out, their curses trailing in the dust. The triplets clung to one another inside the doorway, trembling. For them, danger had always been a shadow, but now it had a face. The angry men who wanted them gone, or worse. Silas returned to the porch, his shoulders heavy but unbowed. He crouched before the children once more, his voice firm, reassuring. "They'll try to scare us. They'll try to drive us apart. But as long as you're under my roof, you'll be safe. No one will take you from here." The children nodded, though their eyes betrayed their fear. That night, the ranch burned with watchfires. Men patrolled the fences, rifles slung across their backs. Silas stood long under the stars, his gaze never leaving the dark horizon. The backlash had come, but it was only the beginning. For the first time in years, Silas McGraw knew the fight ahead would not be for land or cattle or money. It would be for something far more sacred: family. The morning sun rose over the plains, casting long shadows across Silas McGraw's sprawling ranch. The wind carried the scent of hay and horses, but it also carried tension, a quiet pulse that hummed beneath the daily rhythm of chores. After the confrontation with Hank Travers and the townsfolk, the ranch had become a crucible, a place where loyalty would be tested and the hearts of men revealed. Inside the main barn, Jeb Carter called the ranch hands together. He stood at the center of the floor, his tall, grizzled figure commanding attention. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. Others crossed their arms, and a few avoided his gaze altogether. "Boss made his choice," Jeb began, his voice steady but weighted with unease. "He's taken in those 3 kids, and he's made it clear they're under his protection. Now we've got to decide where we stand. You follow him, or you don't. That's it." The room was quiet for a moment. The men exchanged glances, their thoughts hidden beneath sun-beaten faces. Some felt resentment, others confusion. After all, these were children, small, fragile, and unknown, and yet the rancher they had always respected now insisted they were family. One of the younger hands, Pete, a wiry man with a nervous energy, spoke up. I don't know if I can. We've always run this ranch a certain way. Bringing outsiders in, it just feels wrong." Jeb's eyes narrowed. "Wrong? These are kids who needed a hand. Boss gave it. What part of that is wrong?" Another man, Amos, scratched his beard and muttered, "I don't trust it. Town'll hate us. Trouble'll come. What if this backfires?" Jeb's gaze swept the room, firm and unwavering. "Then we face it. Together." It was a test of loyalty, and one by one the men's decisions revealed themselves. Some stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on Jeb. "I'm with him," one said. "They're just kids. We'll protect them." Another followed. "Count me in. Ain't right to turn 'em away." By the end, more than half the men had pledged themselves to Silas and the triplets. But a few remained, lingering in the shadows, muttering under their breaths, hesitant to commit. They didn't leave, but their silence spoke volumes. The division was still there, a quiet crack beneath the surface, but loyalty, true loyalty, was beginning to bind the rest together. Later, Silas walked among his men, checking on the progress of the morning chores. He paused near the barn, watching the triplets carry buckets of water with careful determination. Nikan's small hands struggled with the weight. Sanny tripped once but recovered, and Taya led them, her courage steadying her brothers. Silas crouched down, towering over them despite his bend. "You've learned fast," he said, his voice carrying warmth for the first time in weeks. Taya smiled shyly. "We want to help. We don't want to just stay. We want to earn it." "Earn it," Silas repeated, his tone approving. "Good, that's the way." The men nearby watched quietly, some with surprise, others with cautious admiration. The children were not just surviving, they were becoming part of the ranch, earning their place, and in doing so, earning the respect of those who had doubted them. By noon, the first stirrings of genuine loyalty began to show among the ranch hands. One of the older men, Henry, approached Jeb and said, "I was wrong. Seeing those kids work, seeing them stand up, makes me proud to be here. If boss says they're family, then I'll treat 'em like it." Jeb nodded, a faint smile cracking his usual stern expression. Good. That's what this ranch is about. Family, loyalty, and doing right, no matter what the world says. Word spread quickly, and by evening, even the triplets noticed the subtle shift. The once wary men now offered gentle guidance rather than scowls. Some carried water alongside them. Others shared tips on tending the animals. The triplets began to feel that even among strangers, they could find allies, protectors, and friends. Silas stood on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting, the sky with shades of fire and gold. The yard below hummed with life, work, and a growing sense of unity. Though the town and rival ranchers might still rage against him, he knew his men were beginning to understand. A family was more than blood, more than law, more than land. It was a bond forged by loyalty, courage, and choice. He watched the triplets as they laughed quietly, their work done for the day. And for the first time in years, Silas felt that the future might not just belong to him and his empire, but to those small children who had dared to plead for aid and to the men who had chosen to stand by them. In the distance, the wind carried the faint echoes of discontent from the townsfolk, but on the ranch, a new force was rising, loyalty, a force that could withstand anger, prejudice, and even fear. Silas McGraw knew the road ahead would be hard, but for now at least he had something stronger than fear. He had the bonds of loyalty. The calm of early morning had a fragile quality, like the last breath before a storm. On the plains surrounding Silas McGraw's ranch, the wind whispered through tall grasses, carrying with it a tension that no one could ignore. The town's anger had not subsided, nor had the resentment of rival ranchers. What had begun as whispers now carried the weight of a threat, one that would soon take form at Silas's gate. Silas walked along the fence line, checking the posts and the gates. He had learned over decades that preparation was often the difference between survival and disaster. The triplets followed at a careful distance, Taya's hand brushing the wooden posts, Nikon peering at the horizon with unease, and Sani staying close to their shadow. "Are we safe here?" Taya asked softly, her voice barely rising above the wind. Silas paused, resting a massive hand on the fence. "Safe is a word that depends on who's looking," he replied. "We do our best, we stay alert, and we protect each other. That's all any of us can do." Hours passed with an uneasy routine. The men worked, the children helped, and the ranch seemed to breathe once more. But as the sun reached its zenith, a faint dust cloud appeared on the horizon, a single dot at first, then a swirl, then a growing wave of movement. Horses trotted, hooves striking the earth in measured rhythm. Silas squinted, recognizing the shape of armed men approaching. "They're coming," Jeb muttered, voice tight with tension. The foreman's hand rested on the rifle slung across. His back, Silas's eyes hardened. "Not if we meet them first." The triplets, who had been gathering firewood, froze. Their small faces were pale with fear, but Taya gripped her brother's hands tightly, a silent message that they would face this together. As the group drew nearer, Silas called out, his voice carrying across the open plains. "Halt! Who approaches? My ranch with weapons?" A man rode forward, his face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, a rifle resting across his lap. He was flanked by several others, their expressions unreadable, but their intentions clear. "Hank Travers sent us," the rider called, his voice sharp. "We've come to remove the children you've taken in. They don't belong here. You've overstepped, McGraw." Silas's jaw tightened. "These children are under my protection," he said firmly. "No one will take them from here without my say." A laugh rose from the group, low and mocking. "Protection?" one of the men sneered. "You think your size, your men, or your pride will save you from the wrath of the county?" Taya stepped forward from behind Silas, her small figure trembling but determined. "We're not afraid," she called out. Her brothers joined her, standing side by side, their tiny forms fierce against the threat looming over them. Silas put a hand on each child's shoulder. "Stay behind me," he ordered, though his pride swelled at their courage. "And watch." The armed men advanced, and the ranch hands positioned themselves along the fence line. Jeb whispered to the others, issuing quiet instructions. Every man moved with precision honed from years of ranch work, each ready to defend the land and the family within it. The tension built like a coiled spring. Dust rose beneath the horses' hooves. The wind carried the metallic scent of tension, of potential blood and dust. But before the first shot could ring out, Silas lifted his voice once more. "This isn't just about you or me," he called. "It's about right and wrong. These children are no threat to anyone. Leave now, and I will allow you to ride away with your dignity intact. Attack, and you will answer to every man and every law that I enforce on this land." The rider etched. The front hesitated, caught between pride, fury, and a dawning respect. His men exchanged uncertain glances. The triplets, though tiny, had inspired a courage in their protector that seemed impossible to challenge. After a tense moment, the man pulled back his reins. "This isn't over," he muttered, "but we'll live to see another day." The group slowly turned, dust rising behind them as they retreated across the plains. Silas lowered his rifle, chest heaving with controlled intensity. The triplets ran to him, their tiny arms wrapping around his massive frame. "You're safe," Silas murmured, a rare softness breaking through the iron in his voice. For now. The ranch held its breath, but the storm had passed, for the moment. Silas knew this was only the beginning. Outside threats would continue to test the bonds of loyalty and courage, but today had proven one undeniable truth. Family, whether blood or chosen, could withstand even the harshest onslaught. The triplets clung to him, shivering with relief and awe. Silas looked out across the plains, the wind tugging at his coat, and knew that the real fight against hatred, prejudice, and fear was just beginning. But they would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, hope had taken root on the ranch. The first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, brushing the vast plains with a soft golden glow. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew on grass and the faint warmth of a rising sun. For the first time in many days, Silas McGraw felt a sense of calm sweep across his ranch. The storm of threats, whispers, and uncertainty that had surrounded him and the triplets had subsided, at least for now. The ranch was alive with movement. Horses neighed as they were led from the stables, cattle lowed in the fields, and the ranch hands worked with renewed energy. But unlike before, there was a tangible shift in the way they moved, an invisible bond linking them together. They weren't just men working a ranch. They were guardians of something larger than themselves, united by loyalty and purpose. Silas stood on the porch, watching the scene unfold. The triplets, Taya, Nikan, and Sani, were already at work carrying buckets of water to the livestock with a newfound confidence. Their steps were steady, their faces illuminated by determination, not fear. Jeb Carter approached, his usual stern expression softened by the warmth of the morning. "They've settled in well," he said quietly, nodding toward the children. "They have," Silas agreed, his eyes following the triplets as they helped the youngest calves drink. "And so have the men. I can see it now. Loyalty isn't just given, it's earned. And sometimes it starts with a small act of courage. The children paused for a moment, looking up at Silas, their eyes bright with trust. Taya stepped forward and spoke, her voice carrying the simple honesty of youth. "We're happy here, Mr. Silas. We feel safe." A rare smile broke across Silas's face, one that seemed almost foreign on his rugged features. "Good," he said. "You deserve that." From the far side of the yard, a group of ranch hands approached. They carried supplies for the barn and fields, but there was more in their stride than mere duty. There was pride, too, a pride that came from standing by their boss, standing by the children, and standing for something that transcended fear. Henry, the older hand who had hesitated at first, spoke to the men gathered. "We've all seen what courage looks like," he said, glancing at the triplets. "Not just in a fight, but in the will to survive, to ask for help, and to trust someone with your life. Today, we've learned something worth more than cattle or land." The men nodded, understanding settling over them like a warm blanket. The ranch was no longer divided. The threads of fear, suspicion, and doubt had been woven into a stronger fabric of unity. Silas moved among the children, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "From this day forward," he said, "you are not just guests here. You are part of this family, this land, these men, and this home. Everything you see belongs to the people who protect it together, and that includes you." Taya's eyes sparkled with tears of gratitude. Nikon's small shoulders straightened, and Sani's expression softened into a rare smile. For them, the ranch had transformed from a place of uncertainty into a sanctuary, a home they could claim without fears. The sun climbed higher, the distant sounds of the plains, birds calling, horses moving, cattle lowing, seemed to echo this transformation. Even the wind carried a lighter note, as if blessing the new chapter of the ranch. Later, Silas stood at the edge of the fields, surveying the land he had fought to protect for decades. Yet for the first time, he saw it not as a kingdom of toil and iron, but as a place of life, hope, and connection. The triplets ran toward him from the barn, laughter trailing in their wake, and the ranch hands followed with smiles that spoke of loyalty forged in trial. Silas knelt, gathering the three children into a protective embrace. "We've faced storms together," he murmured, "and we'll face more. But as long as we stand as one, there's nothing we cannot overcome." In that moment, the horizon seemed endless, the plains stretching wide with possibility. The shadows of fear and prejudice had not disappeared completely. They never truly would. But they were diminished, replaced by courage, unity, and the bonds of chosen family. The ranch, once divided and uncertain, now thrummed with life and purpose. Silas, the triplets, and his loyal men had carved a new dawn from the trials they had endured. It was a dawn of hope, a dawn of belonging, a dawn that promised that courage and compassion could change even the harshest of lands. And as the sun rose fully, painting the world in gold, Silas McGraw knew one truth above all. Family, loyalty, and love were stronger than fear, and together they would endure anything. The tiny native triplets had found safety, the ranch hands had found loyalty, and Silas McGraw had rediscovered the heart he thought long buried. A new chapter had begun, and the plains would witness it unfold, one sunrise at a time.